New Glenn. New Glenn is a family of space launch vehicles developed and operated by the American company Blue Origin Enterprises, Limited Partnership. The rocket has two configurations, one operational and one under development, both using a two-stage partially reusable design with a 7 meters, 23 feet, diameter. Development of New Glenn began prior to 2013 and was officially announced in 2016. The rocket is named in honor of the United States National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, astronaut John Herschel Glenn Jr., the first American to orbit Earth. The inaugural vehicle was unveiled on the launch pad in February 2024. Its maiden flight took place on January 16, 2025 from Launch Complex 36, LC-36, at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, CCSFS, in Florida. Carrying the Blue Ring Pathfinder spacecraft, the launch served as the first of several demonstration flights required for certification for the National Security Space Launch, NSSL, program. As with Blue Origin's suborbital New Shepard rocket, New Glenn's first stage is designed for reuse. It lands at sea on a modified barge called Landing Platform Vessel 1, LPV-1, named Jacqueline. On November 13, 2025, the first stage achieved its first successful landing following New Glenn's second flight. New Glenn is scheduled to launch Blue Origin's Blue Moon Mark 1 lunar lander on robotic missions planned for early 2026 and late 2027. The original version of New Glenn, or New Glenn 7-2, is a heavy-lift launch vehicle, HLV, developed and operated by the American company Blue Origin. The first stage is powered by 7 Blue Engine 4, B4, engines, while the second stage uses 2 Blue Engine 3U, B3U, engines, an open expander cycle variant of the B3, both designed and built by Blue Origin. It launches from Launch Complex 36 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, with future missions planned from Space Launch Complex 9, SLC-9, at Vandenberg Space Force Base, VSFB, California. It is one of 3 operational United States heavy-lift rockets, alongside United Launch Alliance's, ULA's, Vulcan Centaur and SpaceX's Falcon Heavy. A super heavy-lift launch vehicle, SHLLV, version called New Glenn 9-4 is in development as of 2025. It features 9 B4 engines on the first stage, 4 B3U engines on the second stage, and an enlarged payload fairing measuring 8.7 meters, 29 feet, in diameter. After initiating the development of a new orbital rocket system prior to 2012, and stating in 2013 on their website that the first stage would do a powered vertical landing and be reusable, Blue Origin publicly announced their orbital launch vehicle intentions in September 2015. In January 2016, Blue Origin indicated that the new rocket would be many times larger than New Shepard even though it would be the smallest of the family of Blue Origin orbital vehicles. Blue Origin publicly released the high-level design of the vehicle and announced the name New Glenn, with both 2-stage and 3-stage variants planned, in September 2016. Blue Origin began developing systems for orbital human spacecraft before 2012. A reusable first-stage booster was designed to fly a suborbital trajectory, taking off vertically like the booster stage of a conventional multistage launch vehicle. After stage separation, the upper stage would continue to propel astronauts into orbit, while the first-stage booster would descend to perform a powered vertical landing, similar to its New Shepard suborbital vehicle. From the earliest design concepts, the first-stage booster was intended to be refueled and relaunched to reduce the costs of access to space for humans. The booster launch vehicle was projected to lift Blue Origin's Biconic space vehicle capsule to orbit, carrying astronauts and supplies. After completing its mission in orbit, the space vehicle was also conceptually designed to re-enter Earth's atmosphere and land under parachutes on land, to be reused on future missions. Engine testing for the then-named Reusable Booster System, RBS, launch vehicle began in 2012. A full power test of the thrust chamber for Blue Origin B3 liquid oxygen, LOX, liquid hydrogen, LH2, upper stage rocket engine, B3U, was conducted on a stand at the John C. Stennis Space Center, SSC, NASA test facility, in October 2012. The chamber successfully achieved full thrust of 440 kilonewtons, about 100,000 pounds force. By early 2018, it was announced that the B3U Hydrolox engine would power the second stage of the New Glenn. Design work on the vehicle began in 2012, with the beginning of B4 engine development. Further plans for an orbital launch vehicle were made public in 2015. In mid-2016, the launch vehicle was briefly referred to publicly by the placeholder's name of Very Big Brother. It was stated to be a two-stage to-orbit, TSTO, liquid propellant rocket, with the launcher intended to be reusable. In early 2016, Blue Origin indicated that the first orbital launch was expected no earlier than 2020 from the Florida launch facility, and in September 2017 continued to forecast a 2020 debut. In a February 2016 interview, Blue Origin President Rob Meyerson referred to B4 engine development and orbital launch vehicle milestones. The launch vehicle itself, and the high-level specifications, were initially publicly unveiled in September 2016. New Glenn was described as a 7 meters, 23 feet, diameter, 2- or 3-stage rocket, with the first and second stages being liquid methane, CH4, liquid oxygen, methalox, designs using Blue Origin engines. The rocket first stage is planned to be reusable and will land vertically, just like the New Shepard suborbital launch vehicle that has been flying suborbitally since the mid-2010s. Although these plans would subsequently change, the 2016 plans called for the first stage to be powered by 7 of Blue Origin's B4 single-shaft oxygen-rich staged combustion liquid methane, liquid oxygen rocket engines, the second stage to be powered by a single vacuum variant of the B4, B4U, and the third stage to use a single B3 Hydrolox engine. In 2016, the first stage was planned to be designed to be reused for up to 100 flights. Blue Origin announced that they intended to launch the rocket from Launch Complex 36, and manufacture the launch vehicles at a new facility to be built on nearby land in Exploration Park. Acceptance testing of the B4 engines was also announced to be planned for Florida. Blue Origin explained in the September 12, 2016, announcement that the rocket would be named New Glenn in honor of the first American astronaut to orbit the Earth, John Herschel Glenn, with an inaugural flight planned no earlier than 2020. 3 weeks of wind tunnel testing of a scale model New Glenn were completed in September 2016 in order to validate the computational fluid dynamics, CFD, design models of transonic and supersonic flight. In March 2017, Jeff Bezos showed graphics of the New Glenn, which had 2 large strakes at the bottom of the booster. In the September 2017 announcement, Blue Origin announced a much larger payload fairing for New Glenn, these 7 meters, 23 feet, in diameter, up from 5.4 meters, 18 feet, in the originally announced design. By March 2018, the launch vehicle design had changed. It was announced that the New Glenn second stage would now be powered by 2 vacuum versions of the flight-proven B3 liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen rocket engine, B3U, with a single B3U engine for the third stage deep space option. The 3-stage booster variant was subsequently cancelled completely in January 2019. By mid-2018, the low-level design was not yet complete and the likelihood of achieving an initial launch by 2020 was being called into question by company engineers, customers, industry experts, and journalists. In October 2018, the United States Air Force, USAF, announced Blue Origin was awarded $500 million for development of New Glenn as a potential competitor in future contracts, including Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle, ELV, Phase 2. The October 2018 award was terminated in December 2020 after Blue received $255.5 million of the $500 million. By February 2019, several launches for New Glenn rocket had been contracted, 5 for Eutelsat OneWeb, an unspecified amount of Telesat, 1 each for Eutelsat Communications SA, trading as Eutelsat Group, commonly referred to as Eutelsat, Mu Space and Advanced Technology Company, Limited, operating under the name Mu Space Corp, and Sky Perfect JSAT Group. In February 2019, Blue Origin indicated that no plans to build a reusable second stage were on the company's roadmap. In the event, by July 2021, Blue Origin was again evaluating options for getting to a reusable second-stage design, Project Jarvis. In August 2020, the U.S. Air Force announced that New Glenn was not selected for the National Security Space Launch Phase 2 launch procurement. Due to this, in February 2021, Blue Origin announced that the first flight would slip to no earlier than late 2022. By December 2020, Blue Origin indicated that the B-4 engine delivery to ULA, United Launch Alliance, would slip to summer 2021, and ULA disclosed that the first launch of the New Glenn competitor ULA Vulcan Centaur would now be no earlier than fourth quarter 2021. Blue Origin announced a further schedule slip for the first launch of New Glenn in March 2021, when the company said New Glenn would not launch until the fourth quarter of 2022, at the earliest. By 2021, Blue Origin had changed the published reuse specification for New Glenn rocket to a minimum of 25 flights, from the previous design intent of 2016 to support up to 100 flights. In March 2022, the expected first launch of New Glenn slipped to no earlier than fourth quarter 2023. In January 2024, the first stage of New Glenn was being transported at Kennedy Space Center, KSC, from the factory to the launch complex in preparation for a 2024 launch. In February 2024, a boilerplate of both the first and second stages of New Glenn was erected on Launch Pad LC-36 for the first time. This test vehicle was not in flight-ready condition and had no functioning engines mounted. In May 2024, New Glenn was rolled out again for additional testing prior to a planned launch later in the year. Information became public in July 2021 that Blue Origin had begun a project to develop a fully reusable upper stage for New Glenn, under the name Project Jarvis, just as SpaceX is aiming to do with their Starship second stage. If Blue Origin is able to realize such a second stage design and bring it into operational use, New Glenn would become a fully reusable launch vehicle and would benefit from a substantial reduction in cost per launch. Beyond the technical changes indicated, Bezos created a new management structure for the new efforts, walling off parts of the second stage development program from the rest of Blue Origin Company, telling its leaders to innovate in an environment unfettered by rigorous management and paperwork processes. Part of the effort is focusing on developing a stainless steel propellant tank and main structure for the second stage rocket, and evaluating it as a part of a solution for a complete second stage system. In August 2021, Blue Origin moved a stainless steel test tank to their Launch Complex 36 facility, where ground pressure testing with cryogenic propellants was to take place. Following the January 2025 successful maiden flight, Ars Technica reported that Project Jarvis had been shelved. Blue Origin set up another team in 2021 to focus on design approaches that might be used to make a New Glenn second stage reusable, something that was not a design objective for the original second stage plan for New Glenn prior to 2021. As of August 2021, 3 approaches were being explored: 1. Adding wings to allow the stage to operate as a spaceplane on re-entry similar to the Space Shuttle; 2. Using an aerospike engine on the second stage that could double as a heat shield on re-entry similar to Stoke Space's Nova project; 3. Using high-drag flaps and thermal protection systems, TPS, on one side similar to SpaceX's Starship. A decision on which approach to take into full development was slated for late 2021. In September 2024, Bezos said that Blue Origin was investigating aluminum or stainless steel construction and thermal protection systems for a reusable second stage, but that the expendable second stage was also continuing development, and if it proved cheaper, efforts for the former would end. On June 12, 2024, Blue Origin received its communications license for the inaugural flight of New Glenn. The vehicle was selected for the U.S. NSSL program with expectation that the inaugural launch would occur no later than December 2024. Preparations began in earnest in late August for what was to be New Glenn's debut launch, carrying the Escape and Plasma Acceleration and Dynamics Explorers, ESCAPADE, mission consisting of 2 Rocket Lab's Photon bus satellites destined for Mars on a Venture-class acquisition of dedicated and rideshare, VADR, contract from NASA. After consultation with NASA, both parties were decided to forego the October launch window to avoid significant cost, schedule, and technical challenges, as well as the risks of removing fuel from the vehicle in the event of a launch delay. As of September 2024, the debut launch was planned to be a demonstration launch for the United States Space Forces, USSF's, National Security Space Launch Program, carrying the Blue Ring Pathfinder. The booster for the flight was named So You're Telling Me There's a Chance, alluding to the difficulty of landing a reusable booster on the first attempt. Testing continued in October 2024 with successful hot fire tests of the New Glenn second stage. The completed New Glenn first stage, GS-1, moved to the launch pad on October 30, 2024, ahead of the first flight. The Flight 1 vehicle was moved to the launch pad on November 20, 2024, for static fire testing. Full wet dress rehearsal occurred on December 19, 2024, and a 24-second successful static fire was conducted on December 27, 2024. On January 13, 2025, Blue Origin conducted their first launch attempt with the vehicle. After several slips in the countdown, the attempt was scrubbed at approximately 3:05 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or 8:05 Coordinated Universal Time. On January 16, 2025, 2:03 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or 7:03 Coordinated Universal Time, New Glenn launched for the first time. Blue Origin reached orbit on its first attempt, injecting the GS-2 upper stage and the Blue Ring Pathfinder payload into medium Earth orbit. Blue Origin stated that GS-1, the first stage of New Glenn, was lost on descent. Telemetry showed that the booster was traveling at an approximate speed of Mach 5.5, 6,791 km per hour or 4,220 miles per hour, at an altitude of 25.7 km, 84,226 feet, before it was deemed lost. Following the unsuccessful landing, a mishap investigation into the atmospheric re-entry of the returning booster was led by Blue Origin, with the involvement and review by the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. This investigation was successfully completed by March 31, 2025. On November 13, 2025, the first stage of the New Glenn launch vehicle named Never Tell Me the Odds successfully landed on the landing platform vessel Jacqueline positioned 603 kilometers, 375 miles, offshore in the Atlantic Ocean. This would be the first time ever Blue Origin would launch a spacecraft to orbit and land the vehicle's booster, an accomplishment only achieved by SpaceX by that point. On November 20, 2025, Blue Origin announced the development of a new super heavy-lift version of New Glenn, designated New Glenn 9-4. The variant will use 9B4 engines on its first stage and 4B3U engines on its second stage. According to the company, it will be capable of launching more than 70,000 kilograms, 150,000 pounds, to low Earth orbit, LEO, over 14,000 kilograms, 31,000 pounds, on a direct insertion to geosynchronous orbit, GSO, and more than 20,000 kilograms, 44,000 pounds, to a translunar injection, TLA, trajectory. It will also feature an enlarged payload fairing measuring 8.7 meters, 29 feet, in diameter. An image released by Blue Origin CEO Dave Limp depicted the New Glenn 9-4 as taller than the Saturn V. While the company did not provide an official timeline, media reports indicated that the variant could enter service as early as 2027. Blue Origin stated that both the 7.2 and 9.4 versions of the rocket are intended to operate concurrently. Media reports also noted that the 9.4 configuration would offer lift capacity approaching that of NASA's Space Launch System, SLS, Block 1 rocket while retaining a reusable first stage and a larger payload fairing, and could cost less than 1/10 as much per launch. New Glenn is a 7 meters, 23 feet, diameter two-stage orbital launch vehicle with a reusable first stage and an expendable second stage. An optional third stage was envisaged with a single B3U engine, and was planned as of October 2018. The first stage, GS-1, is designed to be reusable for a minimum of 25 flights, and lands vertically, a technology previously developed by Blue Origin and tested in 2015 to 2016 on its New Shepard suborbital launch vehicle. The second stage, GS-2, shares the same diameter and is, roughly 26.8 meters, 88 feet, tall, and is expendable. Both stages use orthogrid aluminum tanks with welded aluminum domes and common bulkheads. Both stages also use autogenous pressurization. The first stage is powered by 7B4 methane oxygen engines, designed and manufactured by Blue Origin, producing 17,000 kilonewtons, 3,800,000 pounds force, of liftoff thrust. Its liquid oxygen propellant tank has a volume of 850 cubic meters, 30,000 cubic feet, while the fuel tank can store almost 710 cubic meters, 25,000 cubic feet, of liquid methane. The second stage is powered by 2B3U vacuum-optimized engines, also designed and manufactured by Blue Origin, using liquid hydrogen, LH2, liquid oxygen, LOX, as propellants. The company stated in 2019 that the planned full operational payload capacity of the two-stage version of New Glenn would be 13,000 kilograms, 29,000 pounds, to a geostationary transfer orbit, GTO, and 45,000 kilograms, 99,000 pounds, to a 51.6 degrees inclined LEO, though the initial operating capability could be somewhat lower. As of 2018, dual satellite launches were intended to be offered after the first 5 flights. Launches of New Glenn are made from the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, CCSFS, in Florida, with Launch Complex 36, LC-36, leased to Blue Origin in 2015 in support of the New Glenn program. As of 2023, Blue Origin and the U.S. Space Force plan to give New Glenn polar orbit capabilities through building a West Coast launch facility at Vandenberg Space Force Base, VSFB, in California, to be called Space Launch Complex 9, SLC-9. The first stage boosters of New Glenn are intended to be reusable, and were originally intended to be recovered downrange on the Atlantic Ocean via their landing platform ship Jacqueline, which would have acted as a floating movable landing platform. The hydrodynamically stabilized ship would have increased the likelihood of successful recovery in rough seas. That specialized ship was scrapped, and a new specialized landing barge named Landing Platform Vessel 1, LPV-1, also nicknamed Jacqueline, was commissioned and became operational in 2024. The main assembly of the New Glenn orbital launch vehicle will occur in the Blue Origin rocket manufacturing facility in Florida, near Launch Complex 36, which the company leased from Spaceport, Florida. Launch Complex 36 has hosted more than 100 rocket launches, formerly launching the Atlas II and Atlas III expendable medium-lift launch vehicles, MLVs. Tooling and equipment for the factory began to be ordered and built in 2015. In July 2018, the build of the largest device, a 16 meters, 52 feet, tall to 41 meters, 135 feet, long to 13 meters, 43 feet, wide Ingersoll, Mongoose, cryogenic tank and fairing fabrication machine, was completed after a 3-year design-build process. It was to be installed in the Florida facility in Exploration Park later in 2018. As of September 2018, Blue Origin had invested over $1 billion in its Florida manufacturing facility and launch site, and stated it intended to spend much more going forward. Blue Origin planned as of 2018 to offer both single-payload dedicated flights and, after the 5th launch, dual manifesting of large communications satellites to be transported to geostationary transfer orbit. All contracted launches from the start will feature a reusable first stage, so just like the practice in commercial aircraft transport, landing conditions can affect the timing and flight parameters of a launch. By 2018, Blue Origin had contracts in place with 4 customers for New Glenn flights. Eutelsat Group, Thailand startup Moose Space Corp and Sky Perfect JSAT Group have geosynchronous orbit communications satellite launches planned after 2020, while Internet satellite constellation fleet operator Eutelsat OneWeb had an agreement by 2018 for 5 launches. In January 2019, Telesat signed a multi-launch contract to launch satellites for its future low Earth orbit broadband constellation on multiple New Glenn missions, and thus is Blue Origin's 5th customer. In 2022, Amazon announced that it had contracted 12 flights of New Glenn, with an option for 15 more, for deployment of the Kuiper satellite constellation. In February 2023, NASA announced that it had selected Blue Origin to launch the Escapade spacecraft to Mars. In May 2024, it was announced the Escapade spacecraft had reached substantial completion in preparation for launch later in the year. However, NASA subsequently moved the Escapade payload from the first flight of New Glenn to a later flight of the rocket. In November 2024, AST SpaceMobile Incorporated selected Blue Origin to launch some of its Block 2 satellites. In April 2025, Space Systems Command, SSC, awarded a National Security Space Launch Phase 3 Lane 2 contract to Blue Origin. As the third provider, Blue Origin is projected to be awarded 7 flights, with an anticipated value of $2.4 billion. Blue Origin intends to contract its launch services in a different structure compared to contract options that have been traditionally offered in the commercial launch market. The company has stated they will contract to aim to have a regular launch cadence of up to 8 launches a year. If one of the payload providers for a multi-payload launch is not ready on time, Blue will hold to the launch timeframe, and fly the remaining payloads on time at no increase in price. This is different from how dual-launch manifested contracts have been traditionally handled by Arianespace SA, Ariane 5 and Ariane 6 heavy-lift launch vehicles, HLVs, and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Limited, MHI, H-2A and H-3 expendable medium-lift launch vehicles, MLVs. SpaceX and International Launch Services Incorporated, ILS, can offer dual-launch contracts, but prefer dedicated missions. The development and manufacture of the New Glenn is being funded by Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, and the United States Department of the Air Force, DAF. Initially funded entirely by Bezos, after 2019 New Glenn will also receive $500 million in funding under the United States Space Force, USSF, National Security Space Launch, NSSL, program. By September 2017, Bezos had invested $2.5 billion into New Glenn.